Welcome to our Next Purpose as Readers on this Tuesday. I can use context clues to determine the meaning of idioms. I love idioms. They are so fun to read in text. Let's see, what is an idiom? An idiom is a group of words that mean something different from the meaning of each word in it. The phrase, a piece of cake, is an idiom. So you might have heard somebody say, riding my bike is a piece of cake. It does not mean that when you ride your bike, you have a piece of cake. It means that riding my bike is easy. So instead of saying riding my bike is a piece of cake, I can plug in it's easy. But a writer's job is to help us as readers to visualize and keep us engaged. So these idioms help us to visualize and keep us interested. Here is an idiom. I could say, I am a couch potato. Instead of saying, I spend too much time on the couch or I'm lazy. So this is not a couch with a potato on it or a couch made out of a potato. The idiom does not mean what each word means. The idiom means that we spend too much time on the couch or I'm lazy. So we're going to go back to our text and we are going to identify idioms and their meaning. So I like to remind myself as a reader, my purpose right now is to identify idioms and to reread the text to determine the idiom's meaning. So I'm going to look for those group of words that don't mean what they say. The text will help me understand the meaning. So we're going to reread. Jane slammed the door of the log cabin and raced toward the Indiana woods. Mother and father insisted that Jane go to school and learn to read. It was September of 1825, and Jane wanted to help on the farm like her brothers. Therefore, she told her parents no and refused to learn to read. Jane scooped up her long skirts and splashed through a small stream. So I'm going to pause here. Right now, I'm thinking about our character Jane, and she's frustrated because her parents want her to go to school to read. She does not want to go to school. So now that I understand what's happening with Jane, I can read on. Running helped her collect her thoughts. So she ran for what seemed like hours. There's our idiom. Collect her thoughts. Can you really collect thoughts? Can you take them out of your brain and collect them and put them in a jar? No, you can't really collect thoughts. But we could plug in something that makes sense there to help us visualize. Running helped her to think better. So she ran for what seemed like hours. Or running helped her to calm down. So she ran for what seemed like hours. When someone collects their thoughts, they're trying to calm themselves down and think better or about the situation. So we just identified the idiom, collect her thoughts, and we determined that running helped her to think better or to better understand or to think about the situation. Let's read on. We're going to skip all the way to the end of the story, and we're going to reread the end of the story, thinking about the idioms. At first, Jane was nervous and certain about learning to read, and uncertain about learning to read. But she met Abe every day like clockwork. Okay, so Jane is meeting Abe, and it says that she met him like clockwork. Well, she's not working a clock, and she doesn't have a clock. So I'm going to think about what that means. At first, Jane was nervous and uncertain about learning to read, but she met Abe every day. So she met Abe every day. So that sounds like a habit to me. So she met Abe every day consistently. She met Abe every day all the time. So like clockwork means you do it all the time. Just like a clock, it ticks forward. It does that all the time. The time changes all the time. A clock never stops. So we just determined, we identified the idiom like clockwork. We reread and plugged in what could make sense to determine the meaning of like clockwork. Let's read on. Fortunately, Jane's intense dislike for reading was only a temporary feeling. She was getting the hang of it. As a result, her nervousness began to disappear. One afternoon, Abe surprised her. To her amazement, he gave her his favorite book. "Thank you," she said. "Now that I can read, I don't ever want to stop." Years later, Jane opened her newspaper and read the good news. Her friend, Abe Lincoln, had been elected President of the United States. She smiled and thought about the day she tripped over his long legs. That was the day that changed her life. Perry County Tribune. Lincoln elected. Abe Lincoln elected 16th President, November 6, 1860. Illinois Senator Abraham Lincoln was elected 16th President of the United States of America. He defeated 3 other candidates in the November 1860 election. So again, I want to go back into the text and identify that last idiom. She was getting the hang of it. So fortunately, Jane's intense dislike for reading was only a temporary feeling. She was getting the hang of it. Do you think she was hanging onto her book? She was hanging onto a book? That doesn't make sense. Well, I know she didn't like reading for a little bit. What do you think she was getting the hang of it means? Let's check your thinking. Fortunately, Jane's intense dislike for reading was only a temporary feeling. She was starting to understand. Does that make sense? So getting the hang of something is you start to understand it, or you get better at it, or maybe it gets easier. Does that match your thinking? All right, 3rd grade. You are now going to identify idioms and their meanings on your workbook page on your Reading Wonders backpack. Good luck.